Today we're diving into a really fascinating and pretty complex story unfolding in India's higher education system. It's a story about a huge push for fairness and equity on college campuses, and how that very attempt has kicked off a major debate. Let's get into how a solution that was meant to help ended up becoming a huge point of contention.
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? We're looking at a policy that was created with the best of intentions, to protect students from marginalized communities. But then it faced this fierce opposition, and a lot of it came from the very people it was supposed to help. So how on earth did that happen?
To get it, we've got to rewind the clock a bit, back more than a decade ago. This is where we see the first real attempt to formally tackle discrimination in higher ed on a national level. This was the starting line.
Right, so back in 2012, India's University Grants Commission, the UGC, put out this new framework. The goal was simple and super important. Start dealing with the deep-rooted issue of caste-based discrimination. We're talking about students from scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes. It was a really vital first move, but as you're about to see, it had some pretty serious holes.
Yeah, so here's a look at why that original plan was so weak. The definition of what counted as discrimination? Super generic. The way you were supposed to file a complaint? Totally vague. And enforcement? Barely there. It required universities to set up these equal opportunity cells, but they often didn't have any real power. The whole thing was basically advisory, you know? It lacked the teeth to actually make a big difference.
So, knowing that the old system wasn't cutting it, the UGC came back in early 2026 with a brand new, much stronger set of regulations. This was meant to be the real deal, the comprehensive fix for everything that was wrong with the 2012 framework.
And the ambition here was huge. I mean, this wasn't just some minor update. This was a complete overhaul, directly tied to India's massive national education policy. The official goal was full equity and inclusion. They were trying to create a truly safe and protected environment for every single student. And when you put the old and new rules side by side, wow, the difference is just night and day. The scope went from just a few caste categories to including women, people with disabilities, and gender minorities. The definitions of discrimination were now super specific, and the enforcement? It was now statutory, with the UGC watching over it. Plus, for the very first time, there were explicit penalties, real consequences. On paper, this thing looked like a slam dunk.
So you'd think there would be parties in the streets, right? Especially from the activist groups who'd been demanding stronger protections for years. But that is not what happened, not even close. And this is where our story takes a really sharp, unexpected turn. Instead of applause, these new regulations were hit with this surprising wave of criticism, and the shocker was where it was coming from. A lot of it was from academics and student groups, from the very same marginalized communities the rules were built to protect.
This quote really gets to the heart of what they were afraid of. The opponents were basically saying, look, the intention is good, but the regulations themselves are flawed. They were worried that without the right checks and balances, the new rules could be abused and end up hurting academic freedom and even the search for real equity itself.
Okay, so what was the problem specifically? Let's break down exactly why these proposed rules got so controversial so fast.
One of the biggest sticking points was this new, incredibly broad definition of discrimination. The 2026 rules had this long, detailed list of things you couldn't do, and it even covered subtle and indirect biases. Now, that was meant to be a good thing, to catch everything, but it really opened up a can of worms.
And here's where you can really see their point. Critics worried that a definition that broad could be weaponized. A personal argument, a bad grade, an academic disagreement. Could any of it be twisted and framed as discrimination? The fear was that this would create a chilling effect, where professors and students would just become too scared to talk about sensitive topics at all, which, of course, stifles the very conversations you need to have.
And the worries went even deeper. Critics pointed out a lack of clear due process. Like, what happens if you're accused? How do you appeal? The rules were kind of silent on that. There were also fears that putting people on these new equity committees would just be tokenism. And, interestingly, some people argued that by focusing so much on specific reserved groups, the rules might actually ignore students from the general category who also face discrimination, maybe based on their religion or where they're from.
So this really boils it all down. On one side, you've got supporters saying these strong rules are absolutely essential for real protection, to finally make good on a national promise. And on the other side, you have these opponents, again, many from within the very same communities, saying, whoa, hold on. Without the right safeguards, these rules could be misused, politicize everything, and end up poisoning the well for everyone.
Now, this intense debate didn't just stay within university walls. Oh no, it blew up, escalating all the way to a major legal challenge that has basically put the entire thing on ice.
January 2026. That's the key date. That's when the Supreme Court of India stepped in. They looked at the seriousness of all these concerns being raised, and they issued an interim stay, basically hitting the pause button on the new regulations.
So this timeline just lays it all out for you. We started with those weak 2012 guidelines. Then came the big national policy in 2020 calling for something better. Then in early 2026, we got the powerful new regulations, and almost immediately the Supreme Court slammed on the brakes. That's how we ended up in this standoff.
And that brings us to the great paradox of the whole situation. Because of this huge fight over the new, stronger rules, the entire system has been thrown back to the old, weaker 2012 framework. So, those are the rules on campuses today, the ones pretty much everyone agrees don't work very well, all while the future gets battled out in court.
And his whole saga leaves us with a really profound and difficult question, and it's one that goes way beyond India's campuses. It gets at this fundamental dilemma. How do you design protection for people that feels safe for everyone involved? Is real safety found in strong, top-down rules, or is it found in safeguards, in due process, and in trust? Finding that balance, well, that's the incredibly complex puzzle at the very heart of this.